But let's go now to the South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas. He stood up against anti-Semitism at the Adelaide Writers Festival. He didn't challenge free speech. The Premier just said last week that because the festival was giving a platform to two people who spread hatred against Israel and the Jewish people, one demonising Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as well, the Premier said then he'd steer clear, he'd boycott this prestigious event. Good on him. It cost the event a major sponsor too, by the way. But there's another point about these events, these writers' festivals and the like, that needs some attention. Whether they're in Adelaide, Melbourne, Canberra, Brisbane, Sydney, wherever, they're almost always leftist stacks. They have some great writers, sure, wonderful. But what they don't do is diversity. They rely on large licks of taxpayers' money, but what they put up doesn't reflect the broad range of taxpayers' opinions and views. Their idea of diversity is green left, hard left, radical left, soft left, revolutionary left. The only exception is the occasional Chardonnay socialist. It's like that in Adelaide again this year. And cop this, there are just so many current and former ABC types that go along to this. Let's just scroll through the list of them now. These are the current and former ABC personalities that are appearing at the Adelaide Writers Festival. Now, remember, this stuff is paid for largely by taxpayers. So these ABC types are paid by you to do their day jobs, or have been, usually pumping out ideologically green left material. Then for a bit of a change, they get flown to writers' festivals and put up in flash pubs, and then they swan around with the other leftists on more of your taxpayers' dollars, cashing in on the ABC brand that you pay for. It's also lovely for them, isn't it? But it must be bloody boring as they all get together and agree on everything. You know, border security is a travesty. Coal and gas are killing the planet. Other people should pay more tax. Everyone has to cut their emissions, except people flying to writers' festivals, of course. Mainstream, conservative or right-of-centre views just don't feature. No contrarians, just more people using your tax dollars against your interests under false pretences. I raised this with the South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas.
Well, to ensure there's a diversity of ideas, Chris, the worst thing that could happen, of course, would be for the government to start telling the Adelaide Writers' Week Festival what to do. And this is where it's, getting the balance right here is important. I, for one, don't particularly like the idea of politicians practising cancel culture, let alone politicians telling independent festivals that want to celebrate diversity of opinion what to do. That said, I think I'm free to express an opinion and take a strong stance on matters that I feel I have a strong conviction about, whether it be anti-Semitism or indeed standing up for Ukraine. So trying to get that balance right is important, as I'm sure many of your viewers can appreciate. But for what it's worth, I will always advocate for a diversity of opinion, and that opinion should be argued robustly, but also with a degree of civility that respects that good people can have different views and arrive at different conclusions.
Yeah, we've got to learn to have those civil disagreements, and you've taken a strong stand on those principles of anti-Semitism and when it comes to Ukraine at the festival. It'd just be good to see a little bit more ideological diversity when it comes to the sort of green left versus the mainstream right in this country. But we'll see if they're listening. I want to go on to your battle with New South Wales. You've taken up New South Wales, or at least a rugby league idea, with the Gather round, a copy of the Magic round for Aussie rules in Adelaide in April. That's going to be fantastic. But you made a bold bid to grab the New Year's test from Sydney. That hasn't happened. You've lost that battle?
Well, I'm not too sure if we're putting the cue in the rack on that, Chris. I mean, the South Australian Cricket Association came to me and said, oh, look, are you willing to lend your support as Premier to their effort to get a greater degree of certainty in the cricket schedule for the Adelaide Oval Test? Now, you would appreciate this, Chris, as a South Australian at heart, that the Adelaide Oval Test is unlike any other one in our nation's cricketing calendar. It's a genuinely unique event. We massively punch above our weight in attendance. We often have bigger crowds at the Adelaide Oval Test than they do at the SCG. Yeah, I think Cricket Australia has taken us for granted. And I'm just not going to be a Premier that lets that happen. So when the SACA wants to enlist my support, I'll back them in, including when it comes to contemplating something like the New Year's test coming to South Australia. But at the very least, I think Adelaide Oval is entitled to a more permanent and certain fixture arrangement, not too dissimilar to what Melbourne and Sydney have, particularly given that we actually turn crowds out in a way that other states don't.
Yeah, it's a great point. They're both great grounds. I'm a member at the SCG, but as you say, I love the Crows at Adelaide Oval and, of course, your mob Port Adelaide and the cricket. So let's hope you can get more certainty in that. But have a look at this. You'll remember this from the New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet, this sort of slap down at Adelaide when this issue was in the news.
A 5-day washed-out test in Sydney is much better than a 5-day test in Adelaide. I mean, why? Because at the end of it, you've spent at the end of it, you spent 5 days in Adelaide.
How do you hit back at that stuff, Peter? Is it just a Sydney-sider with a chip on his shoulder?
A very big chip on his shoulder, particularly after we got the gather round out of New South Wales, where it was otherwise set to go. And look, the proof of the pudding is always in the eating on these things, Chris. Look, I know Dom's got an election coming up, so you know he's going to play base politics. I'm more focused on actually getting results. The AFL looked at either Sydney or South Australia for the gather round, and they made a choice to do it in Adelaide because they know what we're going to do it better and we're going to turn out the crowds. And like I said in response to Dom on the day, I just want Cricket Australia to look at the facts and the evidence and make an informed view rather than feeling captive to the past, which doesn't actually translate to a better outcome for cricket as something to watch on TV or to experience in person.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm heading to Adelaide for the gather round and I'm bringing some NRL converts from Sydney too, so I can't wait. Let's get on to another issue where Adelaide is really centre stage and it's big in the news today, and that is the AUKUS alliance between the US, Australia and the UK, and especially the nuclear submarines. You're looking at building them, nuclear submarines in Adelaide. This is a massive, massive deal. Do you, given your attitude to nuclear energy and the potential for that, notwithstanding economics, we'll put that argument to a side, but if there's the potential for Adelaide then to become the centre for a nuclear industry in Australia using those tools and expertise you're going to get through the submarine project, would you be open to do that in the medium to long term?
Well, it is going to happen, Chris. I mean, South Australia and more specifically Osborne down at Port Adelaide, that will be home to the most advanced nuclear technology that exists on the planet. It's done safely. It's done in a way that is cutting edge. It represents probably the single biggest step change to improve our state and even our nation's economic complexity in our history. And that presents massive opportunity. And I'm keen to grasp it. There are kids who have not been born today who will have the opportunity to participate in the most sophisticated areas of industry that exist globally. And that's something to celebrate, but we've got to make sure we've got the investments happening early to ensure that we have the skills and the workforce to be able to actually do the work in the first instance. And that's what my government is actively turning its mind to.
Now, you're going to have energy.
Come back to the nuclear question.
To do all that, though, you need reliable energy. And we've had the AEMO report out this week saying all states, including South Australia, facing a lack of reliable supplies in the future. You've gone ahead of the other states on renewables. You're now paying gas generators to try and stay online a little longer. Surely we've got to do something about dispatchable power in this country. We've gone too quickly down the renewables path.
Well, I think gas has got a role to play, Chris, and I'm on the public record as that. I believe gas is an important transition fuel. The simple fact is this, and we've seen this globally, and I'd invite even the most ardent advocates of decarbonisation to look at what has happened in the last 12 months. Once Russian gas came out of the global gas markets and prices has skyrocketed, all we have seen is more consumption of coal, which is a very real demonstration that if you care about carbon and carbon alone, then you have to acknowledge gas has an important role to play in the transition. Now, in South Australia, we're willing to actively facilitate that, but we make no apologies about the fact that we are far further ahead of the game than most other jurisdictions around the world, let alone in Australia, about pursuing renewable energy. That is the future. Whether people like it or not, we are on a one-way course to having to consume and produce a lot more renewable energy. And I think that's a good thing, both in respect to price but also into decarbonisation. But gas is part of the transition. Now, nuclear, I just don't think should be ruled out on an ideological basis. I think it rules itself out on an economic basis. But I just think what I want to see in energy policy is a dispensation of people rushing towards polarising rhetoric and look at the analysis about what needs to occur for stable electricity supply in our country in a way that is affordable for industry, but also achieves our obligations in respect to decarbonisation.
Premier, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. Cheers.